But this government, the incumbent government, the Labour majority government, is looking for runs on the board, as it would appear by current polling that the election in, 5.5 months' time is going to be a close-run thing. And one of the policies last weekend that they were crowing about is changes or a return to certain rules about residency in Australia for New Zealanders living in Australia that would give them a faster and clearer pathway to Australian citizenship than was hitherto the case, or was the case for the last 21 or 22 years. Chris Hipkins says this is wonderful for all the New Zealanders living in Australia, 600,000 or so of them. But a whole lot of people here said, hang on, we got a massive skills shortage. We've got a shortage of nurses and workers across all sectors, and we've just provided another reason for New Zealanders or people here to go and live in Australia. The government says, no, this is good news. But have we been played, as David Seymour says, like a didgeridoo? Well, yesterday we had Business New Zealand on. They said we are going to have to do better if we're going to keep skilled workers or workers here. And for another perspective, I thought we'd talk to a man who's recently written a piece on this from the New Zealand Initiative, what would we call them, lobby think tank, the New Zealand Initiative. Dr. Oliver Hartwich joins us again. Oliver, nice to have you back, mate. How are you?
Good. Good morning, Sean.
All right. Well, I would not know how to play a didgeridoo.
I haven't tried it either.
Is David Seymour right when he says the Aussies have played us like a didgeridoo on this issue?
Yeah, I think he's got a point, because we have to face the fact that Australia is, of course, making policy always in its own interest. It's never been different. And frankly, all countries do that.
Yeah.
So when they closed the border to New Zealanders a little bit in 2001, introduced a special purpose visa, that was a policy that served Australia at the time, because at the time, the Australian Prime Minister, that was John Howard, thought that Australia's borders were vulnerable, too open. Perhaps there was a risk of actually getting some terrorists or criminals into the country. It was the time of 9/11. It was the time of the temper crisis, and that was the dominant story of the day. So that's why this policy on New Zealanders was changed back then. But in the following 22 years, we've had some changes, of course. We've got a global war for talent, and Australia is fighting for nurses, for doctors, for teachers, for policemen, like everybody else. And so, therefore, them opening the border now to New Zealanders is a very good move, because it just opens basically a new recruitment ground for Australian hospitals, for Australian schools, and so on. And I think the change that we got on Sunday, even though it has been lobbied for by consecutive New Zealand governments, is frankly one that was made in Australia for Australian interests.
Right. So we were played.
Yes, and I mean, obviously this is good news for the New Zealanders, the 600,000 or 700,000 or so of them already living in Australia. It is also good news for anyone here contemplating a move across the ditch in search of better, probably weather, and in search of better pay. So they will now have a prospect of attaining Australian citizenship within 4 years, without any great tests, without any great requirements. After 4 years in Australia, you qualify, you get a passport, and then you've got a choice for life where you want to reside. And you have access to the whole Australian welfare state. You can vote. Australian welfare state, you can vote. You can do whatever you like. You will become an Australian with all their rights. And it's kind of interesting and a bit ironic, actually, seeing Chris Hipkins at the citizenship ceremony on Sunday, celebrating that dozens of his fellow Kiwis have now become Aussies and will probably never return. I cannot imagine any other Prime Minister in any other country going to a citizenship ceremony in a neighboring country celebrating that he's just lost a part of his population.